Hello ladies, welcome back to Music and Beauty TV and thank you for subscribing. These are the products we're going to be using today. I have some Shea Moisture, black castor oil, some Bonti Silk Effects, some Sproil, which is for the scalp. We're going to be using Rasta Free of Frelly 100% hair, and we're going to be using 7 packs of this cut in half. This is my favorite braiding hair by far. This is my client slash sister. I wanted to do this tutorial for you guys because I wanted to show you how I do my box braids. This is my typical parting style. My objective is to get a full head of box braids, but I want it to not be too heavy, hence why we're only using 7 packs. I also don't like when the parts go straight back in a row and there's no windows in the braiding pattern. So what I usually do is section off the first sliver, that's about 1 inch of hair, and then I also section off a portion on top. This is the, I guess, most important portion of the hair for achieving the style and getting the parting the way that I want it to be without compromising the overall look of box braids. So you guys will understand what I mean as time goes on. So typically I'll section off that part and then I'll get started in the back. Some people like to start in the front. To me, it's easier to start in the back. My sister is getting medium box braids, so that's why the parts and the sections are going to be the size that they are. And this is how I separate the hair. So I'll take it out of the package and I'll typically begin by cutting it in half. Now, a lot of people may not be in favor of cutting the hair in half because I know it does cause stragglies and frizzies, but I will show you how to handle that later on. So cutting it in half and stretching it pretty much allows for I guess a gradual transition of thickness to thinness in the hair. Most of my clients prefer it this way. I don't know, somewhere down the line a lot of people just began requesting their braids to be this way, so this became like my go-to style. So I cut it in half and I stretch it and make sure that the ends are frayed so that you don't have blunt ends, as you probably have seen in a ton of YouTube tutorials already. This is going to create a natural flow for the finished product. I like to use Bonti Silk Effects. If a lot of you guys don't know that already, this is my favorite product to use when braiding hair. And I also like to use some sort of oil to hydrate the hair. So now I'm going to start off by sectioning my first part, my first braid. I'm going to apply some Bonti Silk Effects so that I can lay it down at the root, and then go in with the hair that I sectioned off and begin braiding in. Now I have another tutorial called the perfect braid, and in that tutorial I show you guys more in depth how I install my individuals, and I do this method I call separating at the root. It's very important to me because when I separate at the root, that allows the braid to hold on tighter to the client's hair without me having to grip super tight. Majority of my clients say it doesn't hurt when I braid their hair, and I think it has something to do with this method. If you want to know more details about this method of separating at the root and the way that I install box braids individually, then make sure you check out that video. So this is the first braid. So I installed it, braided all the way down, and this is about the length that you get and the girth. This is the size that we're working with, and so my objective is to maintain this size. So I highly recommend, if you guys are doing this, maintain this size braid with every braid that you do. You don't want to be doing a full head of box braids and have 3-4 different sizes. Make sure that you really pay close attention. If you have to add hair, take hair away, sometimes you may start a braid and realize it's not the right size, take it down and redo it. Don't do your client like that. I've been braiding for years and I know what it's like. So here you see the first row. This is 6 braids, and I wanted to show you guys the movement. Sometimes people will put braids in so tight that you can't do anything with them. Typically my clients are able to move their hair into full versatile styles right after they get their hair done, as long as they can handle the pain, of course, but that's because their braids do move, and that's my objective. So I'm really just walking you guys through row by row, just so you guys can see. I'm beginning my windows now. To me, it's very important to have windows, and that means that I'm sectioning the braids to where one braid is not sitting on the next. I typically want each braid to fall in between the 2 braids beneath it, if that makes sense. Just observe what I'm doing in more detail. You can stop, rewind, pause, but hopefully you get my gist. Comment below if you don't understand what I mean when I explain windows. Does that make sense? Now that I'm moving toward the middle of the head, I typically make the parts bigger and bigger. And this is my secret for achieving a full head of box braids without it being super heavy. If all of your parts throughout the entire head are super small, then you're going to end up in a situation where you have a ton of braids in the person's head, and it's almost going to be like a mop. It can appear too full, and it can definitely feel too full. That makes it hard for the client to be able to grip it into ponytails and do a lot of things with it because it's so heavy and so full. I wanted to show you guys a close-up again of me installing this braid, because now that I'm in the center of the head, a lot more of her hair is going into the braid, which means I need to manage how much hair I'm adding to her hair. If I add the same amount of hair to this section as I did in the bottom, what's going to happen is I'm going to get a really fat starting braid and it's going to get super skinny at the bottom. So what I typically do instead is I will add less hair at this point, and then I'll go back in and I will feed in some more hair. That way the girth of the braid remains consistent as I braid down, but I didn't have to add the full amount all at once to the start of that braid. Now, what I showed you guys right now was an example of how to improperly feed in hair. If you are feeding hair into an individual and you notice that it doesn't look right, that it's like folding over and it's making the braid look inconsistent, take it out and do it again. I like to feed the hair in like toward the back of the braid, if that makes sense. You see how I just glided that in the back? It's fed in seamlessly. You can't tell where the hair is added in. This is another thing that I use, another trick that I use on a regular basis to maintain the girth of my braids, even if I want to make some adjustments with how much hair I add in the beginning. And now you can see that that braid is consistent and has a flow. Now keep in mind that if you're feeding hair into the braid and you're like, say for instance, at the middle of the braid and you're feeding it in, make sure that you don't stretch that hair as long as you stretch the other hair, because then you're gonna have one braid that's like extremely long. Does that make sense? Comment below if I'm making sense. I hope that I am. So now I'm moving toward the front of the head. And this is where you guys, I had somebody specifically request me to show them how I install the braids in the front of the hair. So yeah, I just typically go in and I part. I like to part these. I don't like to like move up, I guess, from the back all the way to the front. I like to at some point go to the front and start that first, because I'm going to move back, if that makes sense. I'm going to start this row. This is going to be like basically the row that determines how the rest of the rows behind it are going to be parted. Because this row, my parts in the front and my parts around the perimeter of the head are typically smaller than the parts around the rest of the head. This creates the illusion that this person has this size braids all over their head, even though they don't. So I like to lay their hair down with Bonte Silk Effects, and sometimes toward the edges I'll actually use an edge control. I want to show you guys close up exactly how I'm installing this hair, because now I'm holding my hands in a different way, because that gives me a better position for adding this hair in, since she's a little bit taller than me and I'm just standing in the back of her instead of in the front of her. So just analyze what I'm doing in close detail if you guys want to mimic this. It's really easy. I have two braiding styles. Sometimes I will stand the way that I did in the beginning of the head and add the hair in that way, and then other times I'll do it this way. Some braiders only do one style the whole time, but I just find it easier as far as like my posture goes and the way I stand for me to add hair in two different ways. And as you guys can see, toward the front, when I'm dealing with even smaller sections, I also don't want to add a whole grip of hair all at once, because what happens when you do that is you grip a whole bunch of fake hair on a small piece of your client's hair, and it ends up, in my opinion, gripping way too tightly on the client's hair, and I think that's what causes breakage. So I will add pretty much an even amount of hair. However much hair I'm using of my clients is the amount of hair to try to add in at that initial add-in process of the braid, and then I'll feed hair in gradually. That way I can still maintain the consistency of girth with the rest of the braids around the head without adding a whole big chunk of hair to begin with. So here's another thing I wanted to show you guys when you're dealing with doing individual braids on the perimeter of a client's hair. A lot of times you'll notice that it's pulling because you're pulling on like the tiniest strands of this person's hair. So I like to clip it along the side of their head or ask them to hold it in place. That way I'm not pulling too much, because that's going to cause slippage and the braid's going to get looser faster. You don't want that to happen. So now I'm showing you guys how to section off the top of the head. I like to do this because this is going to allow me control in parting. I get to control like how these parts look, which are typically a little bit smaller than the rest of the parts in the middle. And that will allow me to have like a full top, which is all going to fall over the rest of the braids. Whether she's wearing her hair like in the middle part or slightly off to the side, I have enough hair at the top, enough braids at the top to be full enough and small enough in part size to create the illusion that altogether she has braids this size. Even though you're going to see in a little bit that toward the middle of her hair, those parts are going to get super fat and obnoxious. So now I want to go show you guys an example of how you can do an individual and you can drag it back way too much. This is like pretty much like how braids start off loose and don't last very long. If your individuals look like this, at the beginning of you doing them, you're not doing them right. You want to try to grip that hair in the center of the box that you created. Don't pull it all the way back to the back of the box. Try to grip it and force yourself, like hold down on the hair while you're feeding it in, while you are separating at the root, and make sure that you're not dragging it at all. Make sure you get a firm grip and loop it at least 3 or 4 times before you begin to pull away from it, because you want it to be as tight as possible and hold as long as possible. My clients typically leave their braids in for 2 to 3 months, and that's because it starts to get frizzy and have to take it out. This is what it should look like after you install it. It should be in the center of that box. And this is what it looks like when you create windows in someone's hair. That way when they pull it back, it's not like rows that are going back. You know what I'm talking about? I see it all the time. So now I want to show you guys how I clean it up. Make sure that you're going in maybe row by row, or maybe after you're done with about 1/3 of the head, as I am, and just look at every single braid and look for those stragglies that are sticking out obnoxiously, and just cut them off. Now when you go back to dip the hair later on in the process, a lot of the flyaways are going to lay down because of the heat. But sometimes you're going to find like really large chunks. So make sure that you observe the hair and cut those out, because when you stretch the hair as far as I've stretched it from cutting it in half, a lot of times you get a lot of those. And I want your braids to look really clean and your client to be satisfied. So now just sectioning off the back and just showing you guys how much hair is left in the back. And after I added all of those braids in, I want to show you guys like just how fat those parts got. And if I'm doing my own box braids, the parts will be even fatter than this, to be real with you. But I want you guys to see the gradual effect of it going from really fat in the middle to gradually getting smaller and smaller parts. That way it creates the illusion, as I've said a few times, that the parts are the size that you see around the perimeter. So when your client pulls it up in a high ponytail, you can see along the sides that the parts are a decent size. The front, the parts are a decent size, despite the fact that in the back they're about 3 to 4 times this size. And look, her hair is still really full. And voila, that is the finished product. I hope that you guys were able to learn something from this tutorial. Make sure you guys ask any questions that you may need. Let me show you guys how I dip the hair first. This is a critical part of the process. Some people don't be dipping the hair right, and then it looks all crinkled at the ends and things like that. So let me show you guys how I do it. First, go in and I cut off some of the stringiness at the bottom, because that kind of makes it hard for the hair to fold into the cup of hot water. Then I go in with my spray oil, and I spray the scalp. My clients love this spray. That's why I continue to use it. If you have a different type of like scalp spray that you use for your clients and they love it, then by all means continue to use that. But if you want to look more into this product, I'll put a link below for it. So I take a cup of boiling hot water and I section my client's hair off like in sections, because I find that when you try to put it all in one pot or one cup all at once, you have less control. Because when I pull this hair out of this cup of hot water, I want to be able to see every strand and make sure that I'm not getting any of those knots, that none of the pieces are getting crinkled, and I can fully control that is being straightened out smoothly. And I just do that over and over, section by section. Sometimes you have to go in and add more hot water to the cup. I didn't have to do that this time, but sometimes that's necessary. But just in case you do whatever you have to do to achieve this finish. You see how straight and sleek that is? And now I'm going in with the scissors and I'm trimming it a little bit more. I like to trim. I don't like to do a blunt straight across cut. I like it to really be natural and just make sure that I really get away the super stringiness at the bottom. But it's okay if it gets really skinny at the bottom. That's a good look the clients look forward to. And after that, it should be shiny. The client's scalp should be really like tingly from that spray. And so then I will go in with the towel, as I showed you guys in my last hair tutorial, and I will lay this towel dipped in hot water on the client's hair. Now that heat is going to help to open up those hair follicles at the root, hence adding even more to their ability to be able to move that hair around. It's loosening up the tightness. So that's my suggestion. And I just like to just make sure that scalp is oiled really good. And I recommend that my clients buy this product so they can make sure their scalp is oiled good. And this is the finished product. So as you can see, like, she can wear the hair pulled back. It's still full in the back. You know, it's light and it's friendly. And it goes down to, I would say, just past the bra strap. Kind of like in between the bra strap and the waist. These are not waist length braids. These are very natural length braids. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Comment below if you have any questions or requests. God bless you guys, and I'll see you on the next video.